Hello and welcome back inside the Part for Made for podcast number 896. The Hungarian Grand Prix review. This is Todd.
No, Todd, not now.
AKA Negative Camera. You know what we do on race weekends.
We watch one, then we talk about it. Then we watch one, then we talk about it.
That's exactly what we do. We watch it, we talk about it some more, maybe talk about it too much. I don't know. But before doing that, I have to go actually find the sporting manager of the Heart of Racing Aston Martin team in IMSA WEC. And I happen to know that this team is very busy right now because they just launched the Valkyrie for some shakedown testing. And I know they're doing that. But you know him.
Wrecked from out of the wasteland. He's bad. He's beautiful. He's crazy. It's...
Hello, everybody. This is Paul Charles, the International.
It's the International, Paul.
Yes.
You guys put 4 Valkyrie tires on the tarmac and we're shaking it down.
Yes.
That's pretty cool.
That is very cool. And that
I got to
engine
tell you, it
sounds
sounds
sweet.
so good.
It does sound good.
So good.
Yes.
Yeah, it took me back to like when I was a little kid.
Yeah. No, it's obviously I wasn't there because we were running other races at the same time.
Yeah.
Basically, I jumped from one IMSA race to one SRO race with one day at home. So someone's got to keep racing while Ian's out there, launching hypercars and so forth and such.
Right.
So so I was getting the lowdown as things were going along, but so far so good. Reliability, and it's hitting all its marks, So we just got to keep going. You never want to get complacent or cocky about that stuff because there's a long way to go. But early signs are so far so good. So
That's
we're excited,
awesome.
And it looks cool, and it sounds even cooler.
Even cooler. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that's cool.
It's going to keep out. It's got to do a lot of miles in the next few months, both here both in Europe and here. So excited to see it.
Are you primarily testing it in the UK right now?
Yeah, everything's going to be in Europe.
Yep.
To a certain point, and then once we've reached a certain mileage, then there'll be a second car built, and then that will then come to the US for more testing. It's very different. So the tracks very different from Europe to here. So there can be some things that work, some things that don't. So you definitely got a lot of mileage on both sides of the continent, which some teams don't do, and then they come to Daytona and it's a big shocker why the car's not working anymore. So
I remember
definitely know about that. So we're definitely putting that forth.
I was trying to think of, I don't know if I read it or if it was one of the shows about Le Mans. I'm sorry, I can't remember what it was, but they were talking about the differences in tracks and how the Sebring track and the sand and dirt that was getting in the radiators. It was when you were at Sonoma and I was interviewing the guys at Audi.
Yeah.
And I was interviewing the head engineer for the Team Yost Audi Le Mans program. Super, super smart guy. And he was telling me that the reason they bring him over to the States and they do testing in the States, they do testing in Europe, is just exactly what you said. The tracks are different and the environments are different. In where they run. And he gave me the example of the sand and the granularity of the sand and the dirt at Sebring when they're running 12 hours, and it was getting into the radiators, whereas like at Le Mans, the dirt and grime and any sort of sand and stuff like that was a different consistency and it had a different impact. And so they were running it. That's just how... it's Audi. They pick the fly poop out of the pepper, but
with those things you definitely have to. It's a concern at every track you go to. You go to Laguna and sand. I mean, if you don't have air flowing through the places you want it flowing through, it can be a big problem. So absolutely. And then different filters, different ways to guide the air. Everything has to be looked at. Yeah,
that's cool. Yeah. Well, I'm back from my trip to Belgium. If you're planning on going to Belgium, you may want to give them a few weeks because I think we drank all their beer. Trappist beer anyway, so you may want to give them a few weeks.
If you like Heineken, there's plenty of that crap.
Yeah, they got a lot of Heineken and stuff like that, and InBev stuff. But it was funny, Paul. I wore I have this McLaren polo shirt. It's a McLaren papaya, and on the back is Lando's number 4, and it just says McLaren across the shoulders in the back. And when you're over there in Europe and in the airports and out in general public, so many people were coming up to me. Even the flight home, I had a couple people working the security gate. They saw me. They said, "I hope Lando wins tomorrow." It was like, yeah. So it was pretty funny.
Really, the Belgians turned on Verstappen? That's crazy.
Yeah. I guess since he claims he's Dutch, they don't have much interest in him. They're all about Remco Evenepoel, though.
Yeah.
So we went back in the saddle, made it home, got the Hungarian Grand Prix reviewed, and that's what we're going to talk about tonight.
All right.
On this.
Thank
Lots
goodness.
to talk about on this. Before that, let's do a little formations lap. Let's set the table here. I do want to talk about this track in general. Oh, and by the way, folks, we are going to talk a lot about McLaren. You got Red Bull and Mercedes. We're going to talk about a lot of things up front. So if it seems like I'm giving a little short shrift to some of the teams that were kind of also rans, apologies, but there's just not much to talk about some of those teams. So if it seems like I'm going through them quicker and you're sitting at home going,
Not good enough, damn it, not good enough.
Yeah, I get it. But
with your Sauber shirt on and your...
Yeah, you got your Kick Sauber shirt and your Bodas hat on. And you're all excited to hear my, cutting, insightful knowledge of their race. It just, you probably aren't going to hear it here. So apologies. So let's do a little table setting here. It's often called Monaco without the walls. The Hungaroring is certainly a challenging track. Paul and I have talked about these short tracks and how difficult they can be. It's limited passing zones, long pit straight. The aggregate pit time, 23 seconds and change or more? It's a long pit stop at a short track, right? That's always a very complicated strategy design as well. It's a lower abrasion asphalt. They had the softest compounds on offer, but the track was hot. So the wear rates were up on the tires. And all of this combined to make the undercut pretty powerful here, as we saw from a few teams. A short track, as we mentioned before, punishes the wrong strategy. Or the lack of pace in your car to execute that strategy. You're kind of toast. In this case, this weekend, really boxing at the wrong time and then coming back out into traffic is a death knell. You get into a DRS train, you're gone. And so knowing when to box for your race, but also to get you out and not have the traffic, I think Mercedes executed that with Lewis perfectly this weekend, and that's not easy to do. So kudos to Mercedes. It all adds up to a complex and strategic nightmare for the teams. And we saw much of that revealed on Sunday. And you might think that, McLaren looked a little ham-fisted, and they did. But you'd also could include Red Bull, Aston Martin, RB, Williams, all in that category of missing the strategy, and the drivers not happy with the teams at all. Very vocal about it, as a matter of fact. So it was really marred by that strategy that didn't work for many of the drivers and the teams. Paul, what is it that about Hungaroring that makes this so difficult? And then I'm curious, I don't want to overplay, but I do think the undercut was really powerful here this weekend. And I just wanted to get your thoughts on the track, why it's so difficult to get the strategy there, why the undercut may have been pretty positive at this track.
Yeah, as always, the pit lane delta versus lap time delta is crucial to how strategies come and go. Certainly on our side, on the IMSA team, we've got to figure out. We can never have a strategy that's going to put us a lap down, even though yellows come out here and there. You've got to always be up there on lead lap. Formula One have different strategy, obviously, with different tire compounds and et cetera, et cetera. So that's always a big part of it. And because of the degradation, the time you lose on a bad tire is immense, right? So to get that sweet spot where you can stay out on the tires just that little bit longer to open up your strategy window, you get it a little wrong and you lose so much time actually out on the track, sliding around, that you've negated anything you were gaining by opening a window up. So the teams have to crunch those numbers so much to know where that literally sweet spot is, and it probably is an exact lap of the race. Mm-hmm. And depending on what tire compound you're on at that point in time, and then you've got to throw in the chasing ants, as we call them. We've always got these maps running where you can kind of see where the trail of the dragon ends, which pinpoints where you're going to come out in the traffic. And so you got to get that right too. So that's another equation that could easily be quite a little miscalculated by the differential in what lap times everyone's actually doing at that point, and when everyone else is coming in for undercuts and etc. Obviously, overcut wasn't really going to work very well. So, it's a complicated matrix that any team can get wrong, which is kind of, I still go back to a little bit of the black art there from the pit wall to see through some of that stuff and kind of see. You got to see how the race is going to go rather than where it is right now sometimes, and make a call on the fly with the very experienced members of race teams, as well as the people who can crunch all the numbers on the computer sitting back there in the back room.
Yeah. It's I'm glad I'm not a strategist in F1. I think I would lose it. I think I'd mentally fly.
I'm involved in that stuff, but so there's so many layers. That you can miss, and that's why you have a group of people rather than one person half the time, like us on the IMSA team, and we're going back and forth. What about this? What about this? Oh, but this. You're like, oh shoot, yeah, I didn't really think about that. Well, what if this happens? So that's why we have big discussions on how that's going to go. And in the Formula One race, they got to do it on the fly also. Yeah,
it's an evolving thing in real time and reacting to that. If it was me, they'd say, all right, should we pit now? And I'd be like, sure. Sounds good.
Let me ask what Charles thinks.
Yeah, let
Charles?
me ask the driver. Put it on his shoulders, and if it's bad, then it's on him. Oh, I don't know. Charles came in. I don't know.
Charles, A, B, C, or D.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, all right. Well, let's jump in the teams. We'll talk about the teams. We're going to start right at the top with McLaren.
Oh, Jesus.
It's funny that we shake our head at the team that actually came 1-2.
Isn't that sad?
You know what I'm saying? How did that happen in the Grand Prix? We're like, McLaren 1-2. Hey, well done. It's like, oof. Bit of a,
yeah. Very ham-fisted. Yeah. So we'll start at the top. Great start from Oscar, who took the lead of the race and had things well in hand. Managing the tires very well. Of course, the McLaren, that's one of its aces up his sleeve right now. It's really good on tires, whereas Red Bull is struggling now. And he had the pace all the way through the first stop. The second stop was a bit more challenging due to the undercut being powerful. And the team chose to box Lando first to cover Hamilton's pace and the potential undercut. But in doing so, the undercut's pretty powerful, so Lando got ahead of Oscar at that point in time. Oscar being able to run a little longer meant that he would have fresher tires too in case Max recovered up there. And so I can understand the team kind of thinking that. Do I feel like Lewis was that big of a threat that they would do that? Probably not. I just think they were being ultra safe for a 1-2 and maybe overdid it a little. I don't know. So they chose to do that. So this prompted the ensuing radio drama of begging and then ultimately warning Lando to cede the position back to Oscar, which he ultimately did on the penultimate lap. I noticed also earlier in the race, the team told Lando that they were marking Lewis for P2 and not Oscar, which I found interesting. And I was at that time wondering, well, are they calling just a generic overall team strategy right now and not a right-left side of the garage strategy? Because if I was Lando, I'd think, why am I worried about Lewis, who's 3-5 seconds behind me or whatever, and that's who we're marking? Why aren't we trying to beat Oscar, right? That's my thought.
That's where the agreements are made.
Yeah, right.
Or not.
Agreement. Or not. Yeah,
or forgotten.
Right.
Yeah.
Or forgotten, multi-21. right. So that was interesting. On one hand, if Lando's side of the garage, let me ask you this, Paul. If all things were, this is Lando's strategy, this is Lando's side of the garage, we're going for the win. This is the same thing for Oscar. If it was really like that, if Lando's side of the garage was truly trying to win, I would argue they probably would have tried the undercut on Oscar, just as they actually did. But in the team perspective, it's not normally how the teams roll. They generally service the leading car first and the trailing car second. That's one thing. And in such, the team might argue that Lando had artificially benefited from a strategy call on this, and that's why he was there. Otherwise, he wouldn't have been there had they not just been trying to be ultra prudent and making sure that Lewis didn't get undercut. Yeah. That's normally how that would work, right?
Yeah, it's a crazy one. Why are they marking people that they're obviously superior to that weekend? I think that's got a lot to do with not being that successful for a long time, like an inferiority complex. But what about Lewis? He's a 7-world world champion. What about Verstappen? He's leading the world championship. Yeah, but you got the fastest car on the track.
Yeah,
Red Bull always ran their strategy knowing that wherever, within reason, wherever Max ended up, he was going to fight his way back.
Yeah.
And that's exactly what those guys could have done if they just happened to end up behind Lewis or behind Max. I mean, obviously you don't really want to be behind Max if you can avoid it. But, they had the car to win the race no matter what they did.
Yeah.
But as I said, I think they're just being conservative. But that said, you make the wrong call, Monday morning you're being hung from the rafters, right? I mean, a lot of teams, including McLaren, including Mercedes, including Red Bull, have made errors in judgment that they've had to pay for tenfold on Monday for making that kind of travesty of a call. But as I said, not being in that position for a long, they've got people that have been in that position and know what they're doing, but just a little bit of extra security kind of made them make that call and cover something they didn't need to cover at all.
Yeah.
They're obviously a team.
Yeah, they're
not individual drivers fighting against each other, and that's ultimately how they need to be, and that's ultimately how they brought McLaren back up to the level they have done.
Yeah,
Piastri and Norris. So,
well, on that front, you could argue that Lando is second in the championship, and at this point, Oscar's. I mean, when Lando in post-race interviews said, well, I realized, the team has really helped me a lot of times, and Oscar has really helped me out in the past and everything. And I'm thinking, yeah, that's probably true. And in this case, I kind of feel like Oscar probably should have been the guy helping, right? If you're in Lando's world, I'm running second in the championship. I'm the most realistic threat to Max Verstappen. The person should be moving over for me is Oscar. So that's why we undercut to put me back in the lead so I can come home with the victory, not the other way around. And if the championship is won by 7 points or less at the end of the year by Max, you could argue that it's this race that caused it, right? So I understand Lando's, it's going through his head while he's out there. And he's thinking, well, you're asking me to run tail gunner and move over for the guy who's lower in the championship. Do we want to win this or not?
Yeah.
Right? So I guess the flip side of that coin is that clearly Oscar had the pace in hand. It was his race. He was, and in protecting the team's 1-2 finish from a threatening Hamilton, they boxed Lando first, but really wanted to preserve Oscar's leading performance. I mean, in short, I kind of feel like they made this much more difficult than they needed to, Paul.
Yeah, I mean, I think the cold-blooded, calculated approach would have been to leave it as it was.
Yep.
Will they regret it? I don't know. As you stated, Norris has been there for several years. He's stuck with the team. Is this his time to reap the rewards? Piastri's kind of a new gunner. He's obviously a very, very good driver. Did Oscar deserve the right to win the race? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
But is that the right decision for the team to make if they're trying to win 2 championships?
Well, and to add point perspective to that, Paul, Oscar, the 7 points that Oscar got moves him to 149 points on the season. to Lando's 189 points and Max's 265.
Yeah.
So they have a big hill to climb.
Right.
And Lando's the closest to climbing it, right? So I can understand, clearly Lando, once he came out and he was 3.5 seconds, he was actually pulling away from Oscar. Oscar couldn't catch him. Lando was the fastest Tiger on that track.
Yeah. Yeah, but
of
you
course
know
he
what?
would do that to make that a difficult decision, but
He was obviously doing that on purpose, and
Yeah.
everyone's thinking that Oscar is hearing exactly everything that's going on with the
he's
conversation
not.
between.
Yeah.
They're not letting him know any of that stuff because they
No,
definitely
no.
shouldn't, because that's a distraction for him and stop. So I think Oscar was just receiving word that they're gonna switch and we're taking
Yeah.
care of it. I did hear that, but he was just sitting there driving around wondering why would he push when he wasn't chasing anybody or didn't think he was
Right.
chasing anybody.
Right.
And why was Norris pushing? Because he wanted to make an absolute point. And
Yeah.
I think Norris was in his head very difficult for him to do what he did.
I think so
And
too.
I think he was fighting with himself. Maybe it was the right thing to do if that's the conversation they had, and that's how the team is built, and I think ultimately that's kind of how Norris is. I don't think he's kind of like a Schumacher, Verstappen. He's more of a team man than he is they're all selfish, right? And I think at that moment it was kind of like, yeah, remember that movie Animal House when they had the devil and the angel on the shoulders,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Different scenario entirely. I get it, but
Yeah.
I think he was fighting that.
I do too.
He had a lot to think about. He was like, do I want to be that person? Am I that person? What do I need? What do I do to be a world champion? Because that's ultimately the only reason I'm there. He may regret it.
Yeah.
I heard you were probably listening to the ESPN one, but I heard David Coulthard was on the F1 TV version, and he was asked, when you pulled over and let Hakkinen win his first ever Grand Prix, and he'd already won 4 Grand Prix or so before that, and would you do it again? And he said no.
Yeah.
He said, because when I did that, it changed everything in the team. It allowed Hakkinen to now be a Grand Prix winner, and it showed that David Coulthard will pull over and be a patsy, right?
Right.
It changed everyone's forethought, and
It's
evidently
why
on the
Vettel did
radio, Ron Dennis was
multi-21.
saying you're seriously, in trouble, losing your ride or whatever at that point in time. But I still
Well, but they
think,
told Lando that too. He said,
yeah,
at one point he
there
said,
was gonna
"Look,
be a
I'm
lot of
trying to
trouble.
protect you. I'm trying to protect you."
Right, but what are they going to fire Lando? Come
Are you going to fire him?
They're not going to. In 2 races, people would forgot it, and I'm sure
Right.
if I was Lando, I would say, "Hey guys, I understand, but seriously, and what goes around comes around, and I will absolutely give Oscar something back for this, but this wasn't the time. This
Yeah.
was the time. You guys pitted us and didn't give me you put me in that position. Awfully hard for me to give up that position when I'm trying to chase a world championship here,
And I'm the fastest guy on track.
and I'm the fastest guy on track."
Yeah.
As I said, I'm
I mean,
not sure that was
all of
real.
that-
I mean, it seemed like Oscar was struggling on the tires on that last stage. He kind of
It
admitted
did.
that in the deal.
Yeah.
So maybe that made life easy. But what we've seen right now is we know Norris is McLaren's best bet to win a Drivers' World Championship. We know absolutely Piastri is a fantastic driver
Absolutely.
and should be a potential world champion also. But this is not his time.
Right.
This is Lando's time to do it, to try, because he's obviously got more points, but also he's at the point in his career where he's got a lot more of those those things in his tool chest
He does.
to pull out, and he's battling Verstappen, he's beating Verstappen.
Yeah, I agree. And I think Lando is like the hottest property in F1 right now.
Yeah.
And I know Lewis Hamilton fans don't want to hear that, but he is. And it's just, guys, it's not an indictment of Fernando or Lewis or anything else. It's just a change in the guard. It happens all the time and has happened all the time. Lando is the hottest brand in Formula One right now. And, he had to weigh, if I do this, everybody's going to hate me. Or they're going to be upset because I was selfish, like Vettel multi-21 and everything. But that didn't ruin Vettel's career. Vettel was like, I'm not here to play wet nurse to Mark Webber. I'm sorry.
Ruined his
It's not gonna
relationship with his
with Weber,
co-driver.
of course. Yeah,
But
of course.
the team in the end forgot it pretty quickly when he won
Yeah, they
4
did. Winning
championships.
4
Right?
world championships. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, this move would suggest that the team they're not really interested in the drivers' championship or which driver wins it anyway. They're there for the constructors' championship because that's what pays all the money, and I get it. If I
Right.
was a team, I get that. I want both cars finishing 1-2 in every race I enter, and I don't really care which driver it is.
Yeah.
Because that's where the millions and tens of millions of dollars is made.
Right.
You know, it will always be about the team, but I can't help but wonder if Lando wouldn't have pulled over. They were saying, "I'm trying to protect you." What impact might that have had with his relationship with the team? As his race engineer was saying, he was trying to protect him. Or, on the other hand, let me flip that coin on you. I'm still wonder what it might have done to the relationship with the team from Lando's perspective, right? They chose to hand the win to Oscar, even though Lando is second in the title hunt, and the team didn't seem to prioritize that, that of him. You know, he's been slogging it out for many years at McLaren, long before Oscar got there.
Mm-hmm.
And, Zach was always saying, I feel so horrible. We haven't been able to give Lando the car. He bent over backwards to try to retain Lando because he knew what he had was a world champion. And they bent over. They'd done everything. They've worked their tails off to get Lando a winning car. And then they do this, right? So I'm not casting aspersions on Oscar because it was his race. He looked fantastic. But the team did the right call to get Lando the win and the points, right?
Yeah.
If you're in the championship hunt. I don't know. Realistically, it's a fantastic result for the team.
Mm-hmm.
And many have said that Oscar's mild reaction to winning his first race was due to the residue of the team orders exacerbated by Lando's reluctance, and it made his win tainted and hard to be excited about. And I understand what they're saying, and maybe there's an element to that, but if I'm honest, I think I've seen Oscar enough to know he's just a pretty low-key guy. He's
Right.
not an overreactor, and he's not overly emotional guy. He's pretty stoic guy, and to be honest with you, had none of that happened, I think we would have got the same reaction from him.
Yeah. So going back to the whole Lando team Lando thing, what about Piastri? So McLaren, as we say sometimes, probably the best driver pairing right now.
Yeah, for
certainly
sure.
the best young driver pairing
For sure.
for a big future.
Yep.
Let's just say they don't adhere to that rule that they had talked about before, and Lando wins. Sorry, Oscar. I know we said we were going to do this. We didn't do that. Oscar's like, okay, so this is how it's going to go. Oscar is not very far off Lando, and his potential could be the equal. We just don't know where he's going to go.
Right.
I think his potential is still pretty damn strong, quite honestly.
Yeah, I do too.
So Piastri is like, okay, so this is how it's going to be at McLaren, is it? Oscar is not one to not look for opportunities for himself elsewhere. We've seen it already.
Mm-hmm.
If Verstappen's at Red Bull, maybe he won't be at Red Bull. Is that the point when Piastri is like, okay, well, if I can't be equal status, if you guys aren't going to live up to what you said, I'll go somewhere else where I'm appreciated. So if Verstappen, say, ended up at Mercedes instead of staying at Red Bull, Oscar then goes and knocks on Christian Horner's door and says, okay, I think I'm ready to talk now. McLaren do not want that to happen.
No.
They want to keep these guys together.
Absolutely.
They want to keep them happy. They have a massive asset in their new car. They have a massive asset in their driver pairing. They've got to do everything, and they've got to play both ends here. They've got to keep them both happy somehow. Well, now they're fighting for wins. Before they were fighting for points to try and get themselves. Can we be the team that got third in the championship? Now they're fighting for race wins. They're fighting for championships. It changes everything. You know, it's that little carrot that every driver's been chasing their whole life, and that's my opportunity. I'm there.
Yeah.
I'm in the right place. So now I'm going to put my elbows out and start figuring out how I can use this to actually get me to the pinnacle. At this point, I'm not that worried about Norris. At this point, I'm worried about myself a bit more at this point.
Yeah.
This time, I'm not really worried about the team as much. We're all together. We all had beers at the end of the night. We got something going here. This is where my chance to actually achieve something. We know it can come and go. Happened to Lewis. Yeah. It's even happening to Max right now. Yeah. You can have a superiority, advantage. You get out there, you wake up in the morning, you're going to win the race today. It goes and comes, as I said, and right now it's in their court, and you got to make hay while the sun shines.
Yeah, to that point, I was thinking about the Oscar perspective after the race, and I was thinking, first of all, a chapeau or a hats off or kudos to Mark Webber.
Get off now.
Mark Webber has done a world of good for Oscar in orchestrating the move from Alpine over to McLaren. What a brilliant move that was,
Yeah.
And I'm not sure that Oscar
awkward
would
conversations, that's for sure. But Mark's not is okay doing those.
Yeah, Mark's fine with it. Yeah, Mark's a tiger, and he, Mark may be one of the better driver agents out there. He pulled that off. Not that Oscar didn't deserve it. The guy is otherworldly talented.
Yeah,
and so I think you're right. McLaren put themselves in a very difficult situation. Now, having said that, before we move on to Mercedes, the reality of this is that team orders have existed for a long time, and Ferrari have been through this. McLaren of old have been through this.
Yeah.
Mercedes with Lewis and Nico, Lewis and Valkyrie have been through this. Red Bull have been through this. Multi-21, Red Bull and Max. Renault have been through this, right? And so they've all been through this. But the common denominator in all of this is that it's the teams generally that struggle with this the most, the ones I just named. It's because they have the fastest car and two incredibly talented drivers. And that's actually a good problem to have, right?
Yeah.
So I don't begrudge McLaren. It's a tough situation. Did they handle a little ham-fist? Yes, they did. Yeah. But I think you're right, Paul. At the end of the day, they've got to figure out a way to keep. If they would have left Lando out there, it would have put the relationship with Oscar in jeopardy, and he'd really felt put upon, right? And when he clearly had that race in hand. If I'm Lando, they had to be careful with that, and they had to pull at the heartstrings. Hey, Oscar has run tail gunner for you, on several occasions, and you need to repay that now. Come what may, but you need to repay that. So they tried to manage as best they could.
They did a crappy job. I mean, just to mention how, certainly you shouldn't be begging over the radio like that. I mean, that's kind of pathetic, honestly.
It should have been all agreed before. I think
it was agreed, and I understand why Lando was going back and forth, and I would fully expect him to be that way, and he should be that way if he wants to be a world champion.
He's a champion in waiting.
Right? He probably did make the right decision, but I don't think he's going to make that decision again. And I think their discussions are going to be very different from now on out. As I said, they're not used to winning. They're not used to be dominating. They're definitely not used to 1-2s. So their pre-race discussions are going to be a lot different, and their planning is going to be a lot different. And Norris at this point says, I did it. I paid him back. No more. Yep. I'm going for the championship.
Yep.
Right? Oscar,
remember,
next year for you.
They've all gone through this. Do you remember? And Max went through this. No, that's it. You remember that radio call? When was it? I wanted to say it was Abu Dhabi. Somebody will correct me out there. Do you remember the radio call regarding Max and Perez? And they were asking Max to do something, and Max said, no.
Oh, Brazil,
goes,
right?
Brazil. That was it. He goes, no, we already talked about that. I told you, don't ever ask me that again. It's not happening. Remember that?
Yeah.
This is what he was talking about. Don't ever ask me to move over or be helper to Perez, because it ain't ever happening again.
Right.
And he put his foot down, and he was done, and it was never going to happen again, and it hasn't.
Right.
Well, by Sergio's doing.
He's falling off the road every chance he gets.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think you're right. I think Lando is going to say that's it. you know.
Yeah,
But
he should, and he
he
should, and
should.
I think they need to get over themselves and understand where they are now on the grid, and they've got the power now,
Yeah.
so they don't have to start looking backwards anymore. They just look forwards. You know how simple the life and the Grand Prix would have been if they'd just pitted Oscar first for a lap.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
no one would be querying anything. So they've made life
No,
complicated.
they
I
did.
think they did mute the celebrations quite a bit. I know Oscar's he's a very low key guy, and I don't think he would have been running around with his
No,
pants down,
I don't either.
but he's not going to do any crowd surfing, that's for sure. But
No,
it would have been a little cleaner, a lot nicer for everyone just to
it
kind
would
of
have.
accepted that, and they just got to stop chasing their tails, stop looking behind them, and move on. But yeah, things have changed. They've gone up a gear, and things always
Yeah,
change when that happens.
it's a good problem to have.
Yeah.
Let's talk about, let's see, Mercedes.
Get down.
You got Lewis Hamilton P3, George Russell P8. Despite 2 victories on the trot, I would say that Mercedes were a little bit off the boil in Hungary. Just wasn't a track that really kind of suited their car. Still extremely competitive, though. They beat Red Bull and Ferrari. So I'm not taking anything away from them. They're competitive. They just weren't as quick as the McLarens. Lewis enjoyed his amazing 200th podium. What an achievement that is. With his P3 result, did so despite having that hard collision with Max. We'll talk about that collision in more detail when we get to Max. So let's table that for now.
Oh, you're
And we'll
blaming
talk about-
Max now?
Oh yeah,
Just
Max can't win anything if he's not the fastest car. Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
So we'll talk about that when we get to Max. Lewis, the one thing I did like about Lewis, he kind of pulled some Max Verstappen there, running Max out wide. It was a marginal call. It's a marginal move, but I absolutely loved it. I love it when Lewis got his elbows out and Max made that first pass on the outside, and Lewis just kind of tracked out to the end, and Max went wide, and he's, we're just going to shove people off. I was like, well, yes, Max, that's happened before, except you were on the other side.
Yeah, even the team didn't buy into his rantings.
No, the team didn't buy it. They were like, whatever. He goes, yeah, you weren't there up the apex, and he's like, oh, okay, whatever.
No, I don't know if he said that. I think he was like, F all of you.
Yeah, right.
Back to Mercedes, yeah.
Yeah, but anyway, it was so it was a good defensive driving from Lewis. I thought he was on it. Loved watching it. Lewis he was the undercut king, man. He did it twice to Max. So you can understand maybe why McLaren were a little wary of Lewis's potential undercut, because he pulled it off twice on Max, right? And to your point, I think McLaren thought that both Max and Lewis had more pace than ultimately what they had against the McLaren. But, early doors, right? So he did a great job with the undercut, great job of hanging in there, and a terrific P3 from Lewis. You can't argue it.
Yeah, no, I think Mercedes achieved more than I was expecting for him. Obviously, it's a little corrected because I think ultimately Max in the Red Bull was a bit quicker than them, but the result is the result, what it is. But even so, I think the Mercedes was more competitive here than I expected it to be. I expected it to be behind the Ferraris for sure.
Yeah.
But it wasn't. And so everything they've created with this new car is actually proving the point. We know the McLaren's good everywhere, but it looks like Mercedes is pretty strong everywhere. And even though it's got some weak points, his weak points aren't that weak anymore.
Right.
So, building on strong stuff. I mean, Lewis did easily the best job you can possibly do in that car around there, and executed perfectly and got on the podium and was fully deserved of it.
Yeah. That was just a seasoned veteran champion drive. It was great. He maximized the potential out of that. George had that issue in qualifying, underfuel car, didn't get that final run that he wanted. But he did manage to recover to P8, only being undercut by Perez. So he lost out in P7 because of the undercut again. And that's Mercedes on the podium for the last 5 races, Paul. That's a terrific sign for Mercedes. I'm so impressed. And kudos to all the men and women at Mercedes that have worked so hard to get that car turned around. And I just couldn't be happier for them in doing that. I think it's a terrific performance. Anything to add before we jump?
No, not for George. I
No?
mean, yeah, it
Okay.
was pretty much a silent race for him. He
It
did the
was.
best he could, but he came from very far back, and
Yeah.
actually, it's pretty good to end up there from that far back. So
Yeah. Agreed. Let's see. Let's talk about Ferrari. Charles Leclerc in P4, Carlos Sainz at P6. Charles had another unforced error earlier in the weekend. I'm telling you, I'm worried
yeah,
about that.
it was interesting though how it's interesting by year which corners become
Yes.
points of contention for the cars. This
Yes.
era of car is, it's turn 5, it's turn 8, it's this. It's just interesting that a lot of teams were having some issues with that area that hadn't
Yeah.
before ever seemed to be a problem, you know?
What was it, like turn 8 or something? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah. But we talked about it at Japan and the evolution of the cars and how it used to be
right,
the 130R and now it's Degner,
right,
you know?
yeah,
It used to be Eau Rouge, nothing. Now it's Pouhon, right?
hmm
Or the no-name curve. But yeah, it's interesting how, as the cars have evolved, different corners now become the critical corners,
yeah,
whereas in the past, the really tough ones aren't. Yeah, it's interesting. So he had that, but he recovered on Sunday. He had fresh tires late in the race. This allowed him to pounce on Max when he had that collision with Lewis, and he was there, boom, right by Max. Nabbed fourth, despite having. Charles said that his tire temps just skyrocketed when he was following Lewis to the end there, and he really had to back off and kind of manage the tires instead of having a go at Lewis. Not that it was on, but he had a lot of tire temp issues. So great recovery to P4, given what he experienced on over the weekend in quali.
yeah. As I think you said at the beginning, this is the Monaco without walls. So
Yeah.
him winning pole and winning Monaco, you would think the Ferrari might have a little resurgence at this track, but didn't really
Not quite.
come to fruition, did it?
Nope.
Yeah, coming back from that crash is tough. Need to stop those errors. At least it was in a practice and it didn't affect his start position, and obviously didn't affect his race. It wasn't a thing in a race, but yeah, definitely
Yeah.
need to curb, pardon the pun,
Right.
those kind of things.
Yeah, I would have hoped they'd have been more competitive at this
Yeah.
track, but they weren't. Carlos, his race was compromised by being balked at the start with that battle between Max, Lando, and Oscar, and that caught him out, and he had to run wide, and then they sent him back. So he spent the rest of the race just trying to make back the positions. Hard time recovering to P6. Very lonely race for him, kind of like George. And it was interesting because Carlos really seemed to be the quicker Ferrari on the balance of the weekend, except for
Yeah.
Sunday. Yeah. Yeah. Let's talk about Red Bull. Sergio Perez down in P7, Max Verstappen P5. It's clear to me that Red Bull don't have the fastest car anymore. And I'm starting to believe my own theory here, Paul, that this season could very much turn out to be a 2009 repeat. And
Yes, where they're just trying to damage control to try to
know it.
still somehow win the
Yes.
championship at the end. Yeah, like
And if you're newer to F1, in 2009, Ross Brawn had the Brawn GP team. At the beginning of the season, they came out with a dual diffuser, which was a clear advantage. And they scooped up a bunch of points in the beginning of the season. But by mid-season, all the other teams had caught up, and they weren't the fastest car anymore. And so Jenson Button was just desperately trying to cling on to his points lead for the whole second half of the season. He narrowly made it and won the championship. And I kind of feel
yeah.
like
Although I think the
may be
budgets
looking
are just
for
a little bit different.
that. Yeah, right.
Yeah, I think
Right.
the Braun budget was, didn't
Yeah.
didn't actually have one. So yeah.
Yeah, right. Budgets were a little different. That being said, the team got the strategy a little wrong and getting undercut twice by Lewis and Max felt. This
Yeah.
left him battling Lewis, losing time behind back markers, and ultimately making a lunge down the inside of Lewis that saw the two collide. No doubt Max was frustrated and going for the opening by outbraking Lewis. But, Paul, I've gone back and watched this several times. And I think the stewards got it right. And Lewis said he thought it was a racing incident, and so did the stewards. And there's been all this vitriol about Max. He can't battle toe to toe if he's not in the fastest car, and he just speared into Lewis. And it's not how I saw it when I went back and looked at it.
Yeah.
when I looked at it, and then you'll know how it went down. I'm just guessing. I'm not a real driver. You are, but Max, it clearly that Red Bull could brake much later than the Mercedes, and he had DRS, and they went around the back marker, and he saw the opening, and Lewis left the inside open. So kudos to Lewis. He left plenty of room. Max dove on the inside and was braking. Lewis said he didn't move or anything, but he did. He started to turn in very slightly into the apex, as you would into a corner. You're both going to the apex, except Max is on the inside. He's coming in hot. And Max said that what happened was he was in the braking zone. He was literally braking at the time as Lewis started to creep a little closer. And as Max put in a little bit of lock or a little steering input, instantly he locked up and he went wide. So you've talked about that on many times, that under braking, you brake when the wheels are straight. If you turn, it's over. You're gonna start,
Well, it's not over, but there's a lot of nuances on how much pressure you can give it as you start to give steering input it, right? It's a very subtle, very fine, skilled lesson to know. Yeah.
And Max said that's when he actually put a little steering input in, he lost the front end and slid through the corner. Now, watching that, I think it was an incredibly adventurous move on Max's part.
Right.
To think he would just go in, coast it out. But the fact is he was trying to position himself to block the apex out and trying to block Lewis out, as you do. So I feel like, and the steward said that Max did that, locked up, and that wasn't great. But Lewis could also have avoided the contact had he tracked out wider than he did. But by turning in a little bit, it was kind of a racing incident. How did you see it?
He's got the right to turn in. I mean,
he does have the right to turn in, but not when there's a car there.
No, but if he's given enough, there was enough width on the room. The only reason there wasn't enough room for a car that locked up its brakes and lost its steering.
Yes,
that's basically what happened there. I mean, Lewis. Yeah, maybe Lewis is pinching him in a little tighter. You can give a car width, but you give anything more, then shame on you.
Yeah.
So he was trying to bring Max to the tightest radius that he could to stop him getting a good run off the corner. So maybe he turned in a little earlier than he normally did, but there's still enough width there. But because he started turning in, then Max maybe had to add some pressure, because now he's going to have to take an even tighter radius. And, as I said, it's a very fine line and really subtleness on the brake pedal between getting 100% threshold and basically locking up and losing your steering. And so when Lewis started maybe pinching him in a little bit, has a right to do that.
Absolutely.
He had to add a bit of steering while he was still under 100% threshold. You're going to lock up the brakes, and he went forward. So it looks it looks like Lewis turned in, which he did, but he turned in at a point, still giving Max enough room. But because Max has his tires locked up, he then started losing the line that he should have been on, Lewis was allowing him to take. He lost that line. He came out, and then then as he turned in, Max was kind of straightening up with the loss of his steering input. So I think it was a racing incident. I think there was such fine subtlety to what they were doing. I don't think either of them were doing the wrong thing, but I think Lewis won. He won that corner because, Max was the one that made the first error, right?
I agree. I think Lewis handled it incredibly well.
Yeah,
and to your point, you have a right to start turning in on your line that you would normally take the apex, and because Max was in there so hot, he was going to have to take a very shallow entrance.
Right. Lewis could have driven off the track to avoid it, or stopped and waved him through.
Which is kind of what the stewards are implying. He could have avoided the contact. And if you're, I think Lewis, is apportioning blame. I think it was a racing incident. I think it was a very bold move on Max's part. But he was frustrated. He was mad, and I get all that.
And he was driving like that before that point.
He was driving before that point.
He was driving over his head. He's angry. He's swearing on the radio. It wasn't his finest hour by any means.
No, it wasn't. No.
Max is getting mad because his car isn't what it should be. and the strategy
strategy's
call
not
wasn't
happy.
what he wanted it to be.
Yep.
And as we've talked about infinitum, there's a lot of turmoil in that team,
Oh yeah.
and everyone's living on the edge right there.
Yep.
With it's not a comfortable place to be, and then
No,
you get
it's
in the
not.
car, and that carries over. It does.
It does.
It's we've seen it carried over already, but now it's kind of, and Max, to his credit, has kind of kept it away from the cockpit, but I think it might be at a boil.
Yeah.
I really
yeah.
do.
Yeah, I kind of feel like it got to him this weekend.
Yeah.
And so, in my opinion, it's a really bold move.
Mm-hmm.
He felt it was on, and he would know better than I. He's a
Yeah.
world-class driver, and he was there. If he thought he
Yeah.
could have stuck that and made it work,
Yeah,
well, he
maybe
would
another
know.
day it would have worked.
Maybe,
It just didn't
maybe.
work that day. Just
It didn't work.
another
and,
2% less brake pressure, he would have
Yeah.
got away with it.
Maybe. Hard to know. The counter argument is everybody's like, he should have bailed out, and avoided in the past. I remember when Lewis had Alex Albon twice, the comment was, well, Alex was getting pushed. He should have checked up. He was on the outside, Okay, well, Lewis should have checked up. He was on the outside.
Yeah.
So
Right.
you see what I'm saying? I'm
Exactly.
not picking on
Yeah.
Lewis because I think Lewis is in the right here.
Yeah.
I think Lewis had the right. He gave Max plenty of room, but when he got to the apex, he's going to start making his apex.
They're
as he
racing
normally
for it.
would.
Yeah, they're racing.
They're
They're
of
Formula One
course.
racing drivers, and I don't blame either of them, really.
I don't
That's
either.
why I call it a racing incident. It was just,
that's the way
in
I
that
saw it.
instance, Lewis came out in favor and all the rights to him, but I definitely think Max was driving a bit, not recklessly, but not
a little
with-
ham-fisted.
Yeah,
you know?
ham-fisted is probably a good
Yeah.
word for it, and I think it has
Yeah.
more to do, has as much to do with this what happened on the track as it does with what's happening in the garage.
Yeah.
Yeah,
We're
We're
so
all humans, right? I mean,
Yeah, of
Max may be a
course.
robot, you think, but I'm sorry, everyone's humans and everyone gets affected
Yeah.
by outside sources.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. And, Lewis didn't do anything wrong. He took the corners he did. Lewis, quite honestly, with everything Max was struggling with the car, the balance of the car,
Mm-hmm.
he couldn't get the front end. He lost the front end. It was gone from him. The tires weren't great. The strategy let him down twice or more,
Mm-hmm.
3 times. He got undercut by Lewis twice and Charles Leclerc once, right?
Right.
So it's frustrating. And Max is trying to, well, look at where Perez finished. I mean, Max is trying to produce something in that car that has zero interest in producing a win, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's just Max grabbing it by the scruff of the neck. And you can say, well, it's too aggressive. Well, yeah, I'd kind of agree. It was a ragged weekend for him. I don't deny that at all. But Lewis, had the best of Red Bull.
Yep.
And Lewis had a great race. But, but this is also, I'll be honest with you, this kind of crap with Max, this is poking the bear. You got to be careful here. This will just motivate him.
Yeah, I think he'll reset. I really do.
Yeah, I think so too. And you didn't watch the Sky Sports
No.
broadcast. Crofty said at least 3. It could have been somewhere between 3 and 5 times. Crofty went on a big screed about how he thinks that Max, he was driving so ragged because he had stayed up late sim racing the night before
Mm-hmm.
and too late, and he was going on and on about that. And I'm like, well, okay, I heard you. And he said it like 3 or 4 other times. I'm like, dude,
Yeah.
are you his mom? He's a grown man, and
Yeah.
and
He's prepared himself for many races in the past and won a lot of
Give me a
races,
break.
right?
I flew over to Belgium and was up at 6 a.m. ready for meetings all day with jet lag. I had no sleep. I had 23-hour days. I'm a grown
Yeah.
man. We work through it,
Yeah.
And so for them to go on the screen, it was like every chance they get with him. And I don't know.
But he
You know,
could
I
he could
get
have been
it.
he could have been doing that for the past 4 years, quite honestly. I
Yeah,
mean,
who knows?
from my side, if my drivers are doing that, I'd be pretty disappointed. But,
yeah, of course.
right? You'd be like, this is no way to prepare.
Get
But
some sleep.
you're dealing with a multiple world champion. You want to question his methods?
Right.
Maybe once he starts failing,
Yeah, maybe.
but not right now.
I mean,
Yeah.
I didn't hear everybody criticizing Lewis when he was staying all night in nightclubs with his, friend Adrian, who was shivving people with a broken champagne flute. Nobody had any, oh no, naughty Lewis, you should go home and go to bed.
Hey, everyone was championing James Hunt when he was doing it,
Yeah, James Hunt.
James used to come in at 7 a.m., jump in the car, smoking cigarettes, his girlfriend from the night standing by the end. It's like,
come on, man.
I know it's a different world, but yeah.
It is.
Until he fails you, stop it.
Yeah, I agree. Let's see. Also, a lot of talk about his radio message to GP. He's like, oh, he's being so mean and blah, blah, blah. I don't know. Look, you hear radio messages between you and your drivers and in the heat of combat. I think he and GP have a very good relationship. I don't think that's an issue. I think they talk to, and by the way, if you were upset about that, have you missed the last few years of Yuki's rants with the team? Just asking, because that's full of F-bombs.
You mean cute Yuki? Oh, bless him.
He's so cute. Yeah. So I think we can stop with, he's so mean on the radio stuff too. Come on. Lewis has chewed out his team on more than one occasion. So is Fernando. Fernando's doing it this weekend, as a matter of fact. Let's see. Sergio, what do you say, Paul, about Sergio? It was a good recovery, but the
least thing he ever wanted to happen happened.
I will tell you this. I think you'll agree with me. Sergio Perez is a much, much better race car driver than this.
Oh, absolutely.
He is a world-class race car driver. I don't know what's going on, and I wonder, to your point, Paul, I just wonder if everything going on in this team and all of the pressure is just taking the stuffing out of him. I don't know what's going on. It's the same thing. You will never, in no world will you convince me that Lance Stroll is faster than Fernando Alonso.
Mm-hmm.
I won't believe that. And nor would I believe that Sergio Perez is incapable of driving and scoring in the top 5 or 10. The guy is a great race car driver. I don't know what's going on with him. But the only thing I can think of is this car is very difficult. I mean, all it tells me is look what Max is able to produce in this car right now, where Sergio is struggling, just struggling. And he's
psychologically, Red Bull aren't the most nurturing of teams.
Yeah, I think that's.
If you start making mistakes, they're literally shouting at you.
They're
not like, "Oh man, what can we do to make the car better for you so you don't make these mistakes?" They're just like, "Stop making mistakes, else we fire you."
Yeah,
that's there's different management approaches.
I know.
And that's theirs.
That conversation is. Do you want me to go get Liam? Do you want me to go get Daniel? Do you want me to go get Yuki? Do you want to? You want me to turn this car around? You're going to go sit in the backseat of that car.
I would be surprised if they do debriefs with Sergio and they just have Liam like doing his nails in the corner,
sitting there, taking notes. Tough Sergio. I hope he turns it around. I like Sergio.
I don't
hate it.
think it's going to happen. I don't think he's going to have the time. I don't think he's going to have a season to turn it around. I think it's imminent. I really do.
Yeah, I do too. And it's a shame. I really like Sergio a lot. I hate it for him. Let's talk about the other team. RB, Dan Ricciardo, P12, Yuki Tsunoda, P9. Dan was not happy, and really nor should he have been with the team. The team boxed him way too early. He wasn't able to make the best use of all that clean air and the great pace that they showed all weekend. And to be honest with you, Dan was the fastest of the RBs over all the weekend until Sunday. So why they did the strategy, and even Dan said, you get that call, it's wrong, and it's a last-minute call. You don't have time to argue over the radio, and you pull in, this is the death knell for me. And Dan, I don't know why they did that. They just ruined his race, put him out in a DRS train, and it was just bad. Even the team didn't have an answer for him after the race. Right,
yeah. Very uncomfortable. This is the most uncomfortable team driver interaction Grand Prix I think I've ever seen. As you said, a lot of bad strategies, a lot of things happening.
Yeah.
It was like every debrief must have gone on forever, and
every driver was chewing their team's butt.
Pretty much.
If you just thought it was Max, go listen to Alex.
Yeah, even the winners, as we know, right?
Even the winners.
The only one that didn't probably was Lewis. He probably went home early.
Yeah.
It's like, good job, guys.
We're
seeing all the transporters, all their lights on, and there's a lot of shouting and papers throwing and stuff like that. Lewis is already on the road. So I think everyone had a grudge except for a very few. So yeah, it was awkward, and
Yeah, it
I
really
can't
was.
explain it either.
It's tough. Yeah, it
yeah.
was. But Yuki had a good race. I mean, Yuki managed to run that real long stint to open up to climb up into the points. And once he got there, they had the strategy for a one stopper. And so what that tells you what Yuki did is it pulled off a pretty tough one stopper with a hell of a lot of tire management here because the tire wear rate was high here. So Yuki did a fantastic job. Came home in P9. Good on him. And he crashed in quali. And so kudos to the team for rebuilding that chassis and getting it built up. And then Yuki repaid them with really a great recovery drive.
Yeah, no, it was great by Yuki.
Yeah.
Scoring points. Still don't think he's good enough to be a Red Bull number 2, but sure, he's doing a good job where he is. So it's hard to see these people's drive, but when you look at the strategy and you see what they did, obviously that took a lot of dedication to the concept and strategy for sure.
Yeah. Aston Martin, Lance Stroll P9 or P10, Fernando Alonso P11. Both cars started on soft. That helped him get up into the points early on. Fernando actually was looking kind of competitive early on, and then the stop cost him time and traffic. And then he had another early stop, made it very difficult race for him. He's very frustrated. There was a point where he was kind of running tail gunner for Lance and backing the field up and trying to let Lance get a gap. And I think, in my mind, listening to we've watched Fernando for his whole career. I can tell you he's mentally checked out. His radio comments, his behavior after the race, I mean, he's done. He's done.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know where he goes from here because obviously he's got more contracts. But, mate, the team, obviously the car hasn't stayed on the trajectory he was expecting when he signed that contract.
You never know.
There's no way he likes to be the blocker for Lance. No.
Is that his choice? Is he just being magnanimous and trying?
Maybe he doesn't care enough to care.
That's what I'm wondering. Yeah. Does he not care enough to really care, or is the team asking him to run tail gunner for Lance? Because if that's what they're doing, that's silly.
Yeah, that would be a smart way to go. Because they give him a good car, Alonso, as we've seen not very long ago. It's so easy to discredit drivers. He's old, he's not really got, it's like we know Alonso can still do it, he's done it. But you do need the car to do it too.
For sure.
The car's just not quite there, and
Not
hopefully they can do something and find something that McLaren have found, that Mercedes have found, to kind of turn it around.
I don't know. It wouldn't surprise me. I never guessed Fernando was going to leave Alpine and go to Aston Martin. It wouldn't surprise me if he shows up at Mercedes, Red Bull, or any one of them.
It wouldn't surprise me either, right?
No, it wouldn't surprise me at all. Yeah. Lance, to his credit, Lance had fresher tires towards the end. That let him get the last point on offer. Again, I think the strategy side on Fernando's side was just off a little bit, unfortunately. Haas F1, Nico Hulkenberg P3, Kevin Magnussen P15. Nico
Hulkenberg P3, holy cow.
Oh, sorry. Was that P13? Typo.
More likely.
Yeah, it's P13.
Please edit.
We'll edit this, right? No. P13. I know what you're thinking. This is exactly what you're thinking about my podcast.
Not good enough, damn it! Not good enough.
So Nico didn't get another P6. He had 2 of those on the trot. He had a bad start, dropped several places, and it kind of, so they boxed him at the end of the first lap. Now, this wasn't a bad gamble. I kind of liked what they were trying to do here. They're, all right, traffic, DRS, ain't no way we're going to just run around and make progress at the back. So let's just box him, change the tires, and get him out in clear air. And it worked. He climbed his way up to the points, but then they did that early stop again, and that cost him several positions, fell out of the points, and P13 is all he could gain. So the reality of it is P13 is not great, but to be honest with you, what he had to do, he delivered. It was a pretty good result, really.
Yeah, but you've always, an early stop, you're always going to have to pay the price sometime down the line. Right, the advantage you get comes and goes.
Yeah, so, it does. Unless you can you're a tire whisperer and you can manage the tires, to the nth degree.
Right. Same things happens in endurance racing. It's like the whole fuel strategy thing. You can do a short stop, but you got to pay for it at the end because you have to do a long stop eventually because everyone has to use the same amount of fuel to get to the end. So
right. Yeah. It was a gamble. I applaud it. Kevin had a better start on softs, made up a lot of places, as a matter of fact, to start.
He had a good quality too, didn't he?
He did have a good quality. And, he announced he's not at the team anymore, so it's unfortunate. But anyway, he got overcut, actually, by a few cars out there, dropped him out of the points. He said that they just didn't have the pace to be a contender for points in reality, and that was it. Let's see. We're talking about Williams. Alex Albon, P14, Logan Sargent, P17. Alex was not a happy chappy with the team strategy, and he was chewing the team out too. And even in his post-race quote on the team website, he's chewing them out. Wow. He was stuck behind the Astons early on. They boxed him early, and he came out in more traffic. And he also had Fernando early on backing everybody up to protect Lance, so that didn't help. They were going to go to a 3-stopper, so he pushed like hell on his tires, but then they changed it to a 2-stopper, and he cooked his tires.
Yeah.
And it was like, if you were going to change that, I mean, why didn't you tell me? Because now the tires are gone,
Right. I know we've talked about that several times, right? You just can't stop. You got to go into a stint on a set of tires knowing what the strategy is. You can't go halfway through because the drivers are great and they know how to measure what they're doing and how to do it and how to make the tires. Especially Albon's very good at it too, right?
Yeah.
You just can't tell. Not that late in a stint. It's pointless. You may as well just stick with the first strategy you had with. Yeah.
Right. So he was not happy about it. Logan didn't have a great start. He stopped late for fresh tires, but that didn't really help him. He ended up in P17. Let's see, Sauber, Valtteri Bottas, and P16, Joe Guan Yu in P19. They split their strategy. Box and Bottas, Bottas stayed out long. He ran a long stint. That's right. And they boxed Joe early. That's what they did. And there was a point, though, running along. Obviously, he climbed up. Looks like he might be slightly competitive. Bottas did, but that was a long stint. By the time he boxed, that was pretty much it. They were off the pace. Valtteri's fresher rubber late in the race didn't really help. And that's where they finished, unfortunately. So not a lot to talk about there, unless you have some cutting insight.
I literally have nothing.
It's just nothing. And I really don't have much about Alpine. Pierre Gasly, another DNF, 2 DNFs in a row. That's unacceptable. Esteban, P18. He said he had a good start, made a few places at the start. Then the team boxed him late for fresh tires, and it didn't really pay dividends either. So he finished down P18. So not a good race for Alpine.
No.
So that's it. That's what we think of the race. Let us know what you think about the race and the whole McLaren thing, the whole Red Bull and Lewis and Max thing. Let us know what you guys think. And would love to see your comments in the post for this podcast. With that, let's hand out a few awards. The first ones that we always do is Move of the Race.
Seriously, Todd?
Yes. Move of the Race, Paul. What'd you have for Move of the Race?
I got Oscar's start. It's hard to say,
Yes.
I mean, a lot rides on that start, especially at these circuits like Monaco and Hungary, etc. You nail it, you can win your Grand Prix, just 10 seconds of magic, right? And that's exactly what Oscar did.
Yeah.
And Norris couldn't thwart it. He tried,
but
couldn't thwart it. And Oscar kind of, he marked his territory at that point.
Yeah. It was a great. I agree with it. I'm going to give it to the undercut. I thought the undercut was really powerful. It was kind of fun to watch. Lewis execution perfect with Mercedes. That was great. Ferrari even got into the undercut. Perez got the undercut. I kind of like, with DRS being such a debacle and an impact on racing, I like when there's something else that is, maybe there's a huge, time delta between mediums and softs or something, to add some flair to it. And the undercut was kind of fun to see how powerful that was because of that long aggregate pit time, right?
Yeah.
And on such a short track with all that traffic. So it was kind of fun to see. Let's see. Next award is Donkey of the Race.
We'll do it live.
Yes, Paul, Donkey of the Race.
I'm giving it to McLaren.
Oh,
how do you get a team that came 1-2 in a Grand Prix? Well, McLaren showed you the way to be winners and losers all at the same time.
Oh my gosh. How does a team that wins a race be the donkey?
Yeah.
I think that award was Ferrari's forever until now.
Yeah.
And I think McLaren just took it over. So you're not going to make Grace happy, by the way. But that's all right. She didn't listen to these podcasts.
Hey, I invited her to the race at VIR this weekend. She said, "Oh, it's 5 hours away," and so I won't be able to make 5 hours. Come on, she's flown all the way to the Middle East to watch a Grand Prix. There was Corvettes racing and everything. I don't.
Corvette, you
I don't
thought
think
Flip would be all over it.
Yeah, you would have thought. But,
come on, Grace.
Yeah, come on, Grace. Be better.
I think you know what the problem is just as well as I do.
Anyway, all right. My Donkey of the Race Red Bull is just a ragged weekend. Ragged weekend for the team. Ragged for Sergio, clearly. Yeah, it was.
You like my bass? Yeah. You like it?
No.
No,
ragged for the team, ragged for the strategy, ragged for me. It's a ragged weekend. Not what you expect from 3-time world championship winning team.
No.
All right. Finally, drive of the race.
Get down.
It's in there, Lewis.
Yes. Who'd you have?
I got Oscar.
Me too.
Oh, twinsies.
Funny.
Yeah.
Ah, who knew?
Get off now.
You like that Australian accent?
I do.
I do too. I'm a sucker for that. Yeah, Oscar, great race. Fantastic. Great win. I don't think any of the debacle and anything really should detract from
No.
his win. He had it. He owned Max and Lando into turn one. Brilliant.
Yeah.
Went down the inside. Managed it well, left enough room, took the lead, managed the pace, managed his tie. Everything he did this weekend was terrific. Deserved the win, absolutely. You know, Lando got put out there by a strong undercut. The team knew it, but it was his to win, and it shouldn't take anything away from his first F1 victory. So congratulations.
Agreed.
Yeah.
I agree. His celebration may not have been as flamboyant as maybe it would have been, but after a few weeks,
telling you, I don't think
that's gonna be okay. The win's on the win column.
Future wins, I'm telling you, he's going to be the same.
Yeah,
I think if he won the world title, he'd be close to the same. I just don't think he's an overly emotional guy, you know? Yeah. I mean, Mark Webber's his manager, you know? So, you know how Mark is.
Well, the Australians are pretty emotional, I'll tell you.
Well, he isn't.
No, he's not.
But
he's
then
not.
when you look at Daniel, I mean, Daniel is all Aussie, you know?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Right.
That's okay.
Right.
Different strokes for different folks.
Right.
We'll see which one gets the better of it.
Yeah, exactly. He's not here for parlor games.
No.
He's here to win races. So I love it. All right. Well, that does it for this podcast. Thanks so much for watching or listening. You can watch this podcast on our YouTube channel. A huge thank you to all of our Patreon and supporters. We could not and would not do this podcast if it wasn't for all of you. And really appreciate your support. If you like the podcast, go to your favorite player. Give us a good rating. Share it with friends. Tell them about the Parc Fermé. That would be nice as well. And Paul, do you know what we got coming up?
Spa, baby.
Spa, baby.
Oh, yeah.
Yes. That's not Stavolo and Malmedy Spa, but it's still Spa, damn it. And Paul just drove Spa 2 weeks ago.
I did.
So he'll probably he'll be able to tell us where there's like a rogue bottle cap or something. 'Cause he just spent all that time. He said, "Now be careful up there at Pouillon. There's a, or at Radion because there's a bottle cap right there almost hit."
Yeah.
So you'll be on top of your game for Spa.
I think I will. It's going to be great. Yeah, because as I said, I'd never driven it till a couple of weeks ago now. I've got it in. It's been fun watching the Formula One cars out there the same.
Yeah.
But Pouillon's tricky, man.
It is tricky. Yeah, it is. So we'll be back next week and talk about the Belgian Grand Prix. I wish I stayed a week longer when I was in Belgium because I went down there and
got to get your timing right next time.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. So anyway, all right. Well, that does it. Until next week, you come back and do it all over again. This is Todd, a.k.a. Negative Camera, saying so long.
That's it, man. Game over, man. It's game over.